Hello, this is Phantom Electric Ghost. We are recording. Christina?
Hello.
So your last name, how you spell Ballew?
It's Ballew.
Ballew. Okay. So it's blue, and then you also say blew it up, right?
Yeah.
Is how you're referred to.
Yeah, it's my last name, but it was catchy enough to just go by that. Everybody already called me that anyway, so
Blew it up.
yeah.
So yeah, this is an interview. We are a podcaster. We interview indie artists from around the world, and we have blew it up or blew it. Um, or Blue. So you're an American DJ,
Yeah.
and you say you're a model as well, and comedian, and DJ and producer. So we're going to talk with the questions we sent you. We should have sent them early. Sorry, we thought we had
That's
sent them to
okay.
you, but yeah, we're happy to have you on the program, and we're going to kind of start with what we normally do with every artist. We ask like, well, when did you first get into music, and at what age did you think that you wanted to get into music?
Okay. Gosh, I can't even give you an age. I'd say like from the beginning, I've just always really liked music. Like as long as I can remember. But I didn't start like DJing until a little over a year and a half ago. But
So it's like some people that get into music, they become producers, they become DJs, become vocalists or singers. So it seems like you were more into the producer type of or DJing end of the business. But kind of when you first got into music, what type of music were you really into, and what made you go toward like the producing kind of DJ side of the business?
Well, okay. When I was like in school still, I was kind of in a band, but I was supposed to sing in it and I was like super shy, so it didn't work out. And then I don't know, I realized that I'm not like the type of person to get out in front of people and like perform like that. And then DJ just kind of
Uh,
worked because, you're behind a booth. I don't know, it's just different. But and then I don't know, I just started playing around and making my own beats, and then now I'm in school for it.
when you started to work on music, when did you decide? Like a lot of people get in music, they do cover bands, or they do weddings. They don't make the decision to like write their own music. So what made you feel like you wanted to write your own music? Was this your love for music, and then you decided you had like your own voice that you wanted to say something with
Yeah,
your
I mean, I've
music?
always wanted to make music. I just didn't exactly know how I wanted to do that. Like what would work for me, I guess.
And so this is just the idea of electronic music. And with, like I'm an old school electronic music, like electronic music to me is like having a Moog and a Roland, like Jupiter, and actually playing it. I'm a keyboardist. I'm an organ player, I'm a piano player. So I'm kind of from the old school of being in bands. I was in tons of bands, and I decided to kind of start producing on my own, but using traditional hardware synthesizers rather than soft synths. But now what I've seen, because I'm in my 50s, and the idea that you can make music like in the box, on the computer, is a totally different thing than what I came up with. And so does that, and now you're in school for it. It's just interesting. It seems to have made it so there are more people who maybe probably couldn't get that entry level of getting past the fact to learn how to play a bass guitar or guitar or being a vocalist. And now there seems to be a way that you can express yourself with the technology.
Yeah, that's that's a good way to look at it. Um,
So, yeah, so I'm just wondering, like, when you decided you wanted to get into this end of the business, even the technology to some people is kind of like intimidating. So you felt comfortable with the whole concept of what you have to do to become an electronic musician?
I mean, it definitely took some learning, but I was familiar with DJ software, which sort of has similar things you have to know, I guess. So it was not like I completely walked into it like not knowing anything. Like I had to know how to like beat match things and you know. But actually Chance the Closer ended up teaching me in the beginning most of what I knew.
Yeah, I see that you collaborate with him a lot. So he'd already been like an established electronic
Yeah,
producer, and then he took you under his wing and
that is
showed you some
exactly what
things.
happened.
So it's interesting. What I've actually, I was watching a documentary on Amy Winehouse, and her producer actually had been a DJ, and then he got really deep into production, and then got to more like musician side of it, and learning how to actually direct physical musicians, not just on the grid. But it's interesting what they said was the fact that he had been a DJ, he kind of knew what a hit was. He knew what a beat was. He knew how to get a crowd. He knew what, if he was working on something with Amy, he kind of had that kind of capability of knowing what's going
Yeah,
to work. And that's kind of a cool place to start, because then if you know what gets the crowd going, then when you write a song, you could actually have an idea of what the hook should be, what the drop should be, what's going to get people active, what's going to get people interested. So it's actually kind of a really good place to start in music, to have that vision.
yeah, I agree.
So one of the things I always ask is like your influences in the fact that you're in the kind of DJ EDM electronic place. Well, who are the people that influenced you, and who are your like reference points, the people you look up to in
Oh
your
God,
genre?
there's so many people I look up to. Um, Obviously, Keizo is like my favorite, and Slander. Like those are the two, um, like main people. But I mean, like God, there's so many artists. Like I couldn't even begin to tell you, like how many people have probably influenced me over the years.
So yeah, a lot of artists is like it's kind of like every musician. It's kind of you're all the reference points and all the people they grew up listening to end up kind of unconsciously being like in
Yeah,
how you play, like being a keyboardist. Like I'll look to like a guy like Tony Banks or Keith Emerson or Rick Wakeman, Stevie Wonder. There's certain people that when you become a keyboardist, you might start off learning Chopin or Bach or whatever. You learn the classical stuff, and then you kind of branch into what you want. And it ends up like when you're playing, sometimes you just end up pulling something unconsciously into your music. And somebody say, "Hey, did you really mean to put that line in?" Or just kind of like it just came out. The fact that I kind of have it in my
yeah,
head. So all the things that you have in your head, and the more things you have, the more diverse your sound. Because you can kind of bounce them around,
yeah.
and then become something new. And it sounds so it's interesting in your sound. I do hear a lot of collision of sound. There's like a lot of cacophony, and it's cool because it's like kind of like I've always liked in music this idea of like a
Yeah.
punk aesthetic, or kind of like a Trent Reznor kind of thing. And that's cool. I hear kind of like a Trent Reznor kind of harder edge in some of your music, when you're doing it. I was listening to like
I love
Fundamentally
that one.
Mental, and it's got like that kind of really hard driving kind of, it's electronic, but I can hear kind of a
Yes.
punk aesthetic in it. And is that kind of what you're going for? That you like that kind of harder kind of metal
I
punk
do, but
punk
I
sound?
mean, I like everything. I like that's the hardest question. Like when people ask what kind of genre I go for, I don't really have one, which I think is why I like Slander and Keizo so much. Is they don't really either. They just kind of do whatever they want. And, but I mean,
Yeah,
I'd
I think.
usually like I
Yeah,
do prefer to go a little bit harder, but then some of my stuff is a little bit not so rough around the edges. So I don't know.
yeah. I mean, because you hear, fundamentally mental has that kind of hard punk edge. Then Blast Off is more, or Trifle. There's other songs that maybe have pieces of it, but yeah, you're kind of very diverse in the 5 songs I've been listening to off your Spotify. They are diverse in their sound. Even in the same
Yeah.
song, you've got diverse elements. You've got hip hop, you've got punk, you've got trance and EDM, and it's not just straight EDM. It's got other things like trip waves. There's all kinds of stuff going on. You can't really pin it down. Which is kind of like what I do with my sound. I call it expansive sound, which basically is to try not to pin
Yes.
it down. Because if you say it's expansive, that means I could pull jazz in, I could pull progressive rock in, I could do some hip hop, I could do some country. I could do whatever I want. If I feel like Johnny Cash, I'm going to do something like Johnny Cash. If I feel like Freddie Mercury, I'm going to do some Queen. Is whatever I'm going to feel like. I mean, I could get some Tyler the Creator or Earl Sweatshirt in there. It's kind of whatever I'm feeling at the moment. And I think in this age, that's one of the cool things about music, the fact that we have this way of doing production where you could bring in samples, old soul songs and bring a
Yes.
line in and have a hip hop beat, like have some 808 beat or a 909 or a 727 rolling drum machine, or actually sample like a groove from an obscure soul song and then bring something in and then have something that's like, wow, there's like, that's why I kind of like, I wondered, like, when you choose to sample or choose to do things, do you try to go things for like deeper cuts that maybe aren't as well known so that you can kind of use it without it feels more original, or how do you choose? Like,
It just depends. I just hear something and I like it, and then I just build around it. Like it, I don't really. I mean, I probably should go for things that people probably don't sample as often, but if I like it, I'll take it. And yeah, I don't really.
So what? How when you just kind of are you more of a feel based at the moment you heard something and that kind of drives you to say, oh, yeah, like if you're gonna go sample something, is like, are you just like you're in the mood to make a song, or you just have some kind of moment that like, oh, I'm gonna be creative? Like, what's your song process?
It's all over the place. It's it doesn't make a lot of sense. Sometimes I start with like, I'll find some vocals and I'm like, wow, I should do something with these. And then I'll just kind of like write around it. But sometimes I'll just have like a drum beat in my head and I'll go make it and then throw that down. And then like a month later, come back to it and be like, I should finish this. And then something crazy comes out of it that was not what I was originally going for. I don't really have a method. It's very ADHD.
That's cool, because I mean, I was reading a documentary from a band that I'm really into called I won't get into, but they were kind of traditionalist, and they like, well, we always start with like the drum and the bass, and then you hear some people like when they're into songs, they always kind of like a fundamental thing, always starting with like the kicks and the bass drums and the bass lines. But that's not always how, in the 40 interviews I've done with tons of artists, that is kind of like a traditional process. You'll get a lot of bands that'll say that, or a lot of artists, but then there's a lot of artists that will, like yourself, would say, well, that kind of comes like wherever the inspiration is. I could be walking in a forest, I could be walking on the bus with my phone, I could just be sleeping and I wake up and I got this idea. So some people just kind of have this idea with the muse, kind of like from poetry, this idea the Victorian poets had, like William Blake and Tennyson, all these guys. They felt like there was this universal thing that people could tap into when they're artists, and they can kind of come out of nowhere. And they kind of called it the muse, and it just happens. And some people like to be more specific and say, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write something. And other people feel like, well, I'm just going to tap into the universe, and when it gives me something, I'm going to take
That's more my speed.
more your speed. Yeah, which is like, I think that some people, I think a lot of times if you're an artist and you sit down, it's like, oh, I'm going to write this thing, right? That never usually
works for
works out
me.
that good. Yeah, and even the people who say that they try to plan things out, even when they plan it out, once they bring it into the studio, then their plan kind of goes like, it's not going to be their plan. It's going to be whatever the producer and the other people in the band actually take it and turn it into something better than what they could have imagined. So so when you collaborate, how does that work now, especially with COVID? How do you actually work? Do you work like remotely on your DAW, or do you actually go into a studio, maybe pre-COVID or post-COVID? How
I
do you
didn't know
do
how
that?
to produce before COVID. That was kind of a COVID thing I learned. But usually, like, the only person I've collabed with really is Chance. We just, like, I'll work on something and then I'll send it to him, and then he'll work on it and then send it back, and we'll just kind of go back and forth until we have something we both like.
That's cool. I mean, that's interesting because prior to COVID, like I'm a like pretty much a one person operation, but I had done a bunch of collaborations. I did something with like a full rock band in New York City. We actually put this thing out with this band called Lonnie Claire, and we never met. And this was pre-COVID. I didn't drive to New York and go to the studio. We were sending files back and forth and working on it that way. And then I did the same thing with this lady in Los Angeles who was an actor, and she wanted to get into electronic music, and we put together a project doing the same thing. So I was kind of like a little bit ahead of that COVID curve because I was already working that way. So it was when COVID happened. So, well, I never really. I had no proof when I was a kid. In my 50s, I had all these bands. We practiced in the garage, traditional like 4-piece rock bands and punk rock bands. So we would practice in basements and garages and like warehouses and stuff. And so I'm familiar with doing that. But it's interesting, like now a lot of people are doing what I've been doing for the last like 4 years, is like this kind of like remote collaboration. And some people have found that they have a hard time with it, and other people have found that they've been very productive. Yeah. So do you feel that you've been able to really get what you want out of a song?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, I think honestly, like the only thing I can say that holds me back is just lack of knowledge. Like I like the way like doing it remotely. I just wish I had more like knowledge on how to make music, but I'm learning.
Yeah, so maybe that gets into your classes at Berkeley. Are you still doing that remotely? So is it all learning how to do like recording engineering and DAW type work? Is that what they're teaching you?
All of it. I'm going for my bachelor's in electronic music production and sound design. So we're doing like everything, like from the ground up. The music theory. I'm going to learn how to use Reason, and they're going to train me more in Ableton and then Logic. And then I'm also taking a DJ course there.
How much do they actually teach? Because I remember Berkeley used to have like a real heavy electronic music department, and I actually talked to guys at Sweetwater to kind of go through it. And can I have Moogs and like Jupiters and like hardware synths? So in terms of like the actual using like a Moog and actually a subtractive synthesis or an additive synth, do they teach you guys like the theory of how you use an LFO, how you use envelopes, how you use like sound design from like the waveform up? Are you taking courses like that, or more not? More the other?
I have no idea. Stuff? I think we're supposed to learn all of it, but I just started this semester, so yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I know there are courses that actually teach you how to use Moogs and how to actually build those sound waveforms. Because like the one thing, like just I don't know if you haven't dealt with it, and probably within your DAWs you've seen it, is the fact that you can build tones from scratch. You can actually go through the synthesizer workflow, which is called subtractive synthesis, which is called East Coast synthesis, which was created by like Robert Moog, who created the Moog. And then there's a guy named Buchla that created this additive synthesis they call West Coast synthesis, which is a different type of design of a waveform, kind of starts off from a sine wave. But that's all stuff that if you get into, which it sounds like you're going to get into, is really cool. But it kind of goes toward the idea of the hardware synths kind of teach you that. And I would think, there's all these software synths you can use. They can replicate these hardware synths, but I'm kind of a purist. I kind of use the real hardware. But yeah, I mean, you can get to everything I'm doing with my hardware with the emulators. So is that something that you're psyched about getting into, or more is that part of it? Why you took the degree in this?
I'm honestly excited about all of it. I took the degree or chose this, I guess, pathway because I just wanted to know more, like, I guess, the technical side of everything. So I'm hoping to learn like everything. Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I think it's cool to have a foundation like that. I kind of backed into it by actually just having the stuff, playing for like 20 years. And if you own like a hardware synth, you end up, reading the manual, going all the YouTube courses, and just been playing it for 20 years. You kind of figure it out. But I always wanted to go to Berkeley, but I was kind of told by my parents to do something more sensible. so I went to Bowdoin, and I got like into computer science and stuff, and that kind of roundabout way I got into electronic music because of the computer science stuff I did. I kind of was like, whoa, the electronic music sounds more interesting than doing actuarial stuff for an insurance company. But it's just interesting today what you can do electronically. That is like opening up the industry to all kinds of people. Like, especially one of the things I do a lot is I interview a lot of female artists, and just coming up when I came up, most bands were all male. You didn't have a lot of women in the industry, and I think what's actually made it easier for women to get in the industry, not that you didn't have the Joni Mitchells and Carole Kings and Karen Carpenters, but it seems like most of the people I interview are women. Most of the bands I interview today are female-centered bands.
That's awesome.
It just seems like there's more going on with women getting into the music industry today at all levels. I've talked to female punk bands, riot girl bands, EDM producers, classical violinists, all kinds of people getting into music. And most of the most interesting stuff I've dealt with, I still deal with male bands, but it seems like women artists are being paid attention to more. And in terms of like new material or interesting material that I'm interested in, it seems like there's more dynamicism going on the female side of the industry.
It's different
across the board.
I guess women do things.
Well, I think there's voices that weren't heard. Now you're hearing a different perspective, and I think that ends up being interesting. Because growing up, you just listen to the Beatles and Pink Floyd, and you get that point of view, right? But then you start hearing other people's point of view, and you say, "Wow, I didn't hear that before." You just get drawn into it, So, as an artist, are you primarily focused on singles because the way Spotify playlists are, or are you working toward like EPs or albums?
I've got an EP that's I'm hoping to release next month, but it's looking real month after that these days. But yeah, I'm gonna do that and see how that goes. I'm not really sure the best way to release. I know a lot of artists are doing just singles right now, and I don't know if that's like, I'm so new. I don't know like what's the best way to do it, but
yeah, I've heard a lot of artists are kind of in this mode that's kind of weird. It's kind of historic. We have kind of a shift. Like in the late '60s and '70s was the age of the album, which was brought on by like Beatles, Sgt. Pepper. The fact that you could have an album and it actually had a theme, and then you had bands like Pink Floyd and the Who doing like rock operas, and there's that whole idea that in the '70s artists would put together albums that were so kind of thematic that you would end up getting the whole album because it actually had a lot of songs on it that people dug and it made sense. And vinyl kind of forced you to listen to the whole thing. And now today we're kind of going backwards to the idea in the 50s, it was the 78 and the 45. And you really listen to singles. And Spotify has kind of brought in the, iTunes and the titles of the world have changed things to kind of go back to that old like Motown model, which they just release singles like every week. And then eventually all the hits would come out onto a record, but that record would be nothing but hits. You pick up a Smokey Robinson album, it'll be all their hits. And so it seems like today a lot of bands have switched to that kind of model of like, we'll just put out, a song every 2 weeks, every month. Because the way the market is, the only way to get paid attention to is if people constantly see you or hear from you. And then eventually you kind of look at what worked, and then you put an EP together, kind of like Motown did, of all your best hitting tracks, the ones that get the most plays, and then you put that out.
Yes, it seems.
This seems to be, yeah. But then there's still artists I talk to that have themes, that want to put together records that have a theme. And if you're trying to make a statement and it's more than one song, then they tend to do that. So do you have songs that kind of seem to work together as a collection, or do you kind of just put together things and then say, well, these kind of work together, but do you actually plan it out that this EP will actually have things that are kind of in this that work
No,
together?
my EP is definitely diverse. They are everything's very different on it. Um, like even from what's on the EP, which I guess doesn't make sense, but
Yeah, that's a cool thing. No, there are artists that used to do that. I mean, one big
I
famous
love
artist that comes
Prince.
to mind is Prince. You know, Prince would put together albums with really varied song structures for each song. And then a lot of people would say, well, how can you do that? And well, he would do it. And he kind of forced it because he was such a good musician, he could kind of make it work. And so, but like later in life, he continued to do it, and then everybody, started, oh, that didn't work. See, it didn't work. But the fact is, he was doing it from the
Yeah.
beginning, and his people kind of either still dug what he was doing or decided, they didn't like it. But it wasn't something he really changed. He was doing it from the beginning. But it's interesting to me because I think that was like genre crossing. Like what you're talking about, how you kind of feel all these different things and you put it into your music because you kind of just feel that's what it is. And I think an artist that feels free to do that, to me, is very interesting because then you're not stuck, doing the same song. Some bands just keep on retreading
Yeah.
their one song and keep on doing a retread of it. And it
No,
seems like you
I
don't want
don't.
to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't listen to like one type of
So
music. So like I wouldn't
yeah.
want my own music to just be one sound. I don't know.
Yeah, it's just kind of like the industry has a habit of like whatever is your biggest song, like the machine of the record industry that continues to exist and the one that previously existed. If you do a song like a Purple Rain, Warner Brothers wants you to
Yeah.
keep on doing Purple Rain, or they want you to keep on doing 1999 and
Yes.
run it into the ground. That's kind of what they want, and they'll, even if you don't do it, they'll get a
Yep.
clone to do it. you know so then what happens is the genre kind of gets played
Yep.
out, like what happened with disco. And what can happen to EDM if it gets played, if you continue to keep on doing the same structure, then people eventually get bored with it if it's not diverse enough. um, so like any genre can get kind of forced into its kind of peak period and then kind of fall away if people don't kind of realize that genres expand when the innovators are allowed to
Yeah.
kind of break some of the rules. You know, so that would, like, one of the things that it sounds like you're kind of a believer is like, well, if there's a rule, you don't really have to follow that rule. You kind of feel what the song services the song. So you kind of believe like
That
whatever
is
serves the
exactly
song
how
is
I
what
feel.
I'm going to do. Do you find that there are people that when you work with as musicians that maybe don't think that way, and then you have to work with folks like that, or kind of hear people's opinions who think, well, you should just
I've
do it this way, and how do you handle that kind of advice?
well, I don't know. I've like one of the songs on my EP I let a few people hear, and all of them, like pretty much everybody was like, well, I mean, it just doesn't flow like, you would expect it to. You might want to like add this here or like change that there, or maybe add something like it goes quiet there. And like I tried to mess with it, but I had already submitted it the way it was, and it actually ended up getting picked up, but like by a label, which I was kind of shocked because that was the one I actually was about to pull from the EP because everybody just seemed to not really like it because it didn't follow the rules, I guess. Which I thought that was interesting.
That's what I think is really, that's like super interesting, because if you think about it, like all the people in my that influenced me, like a guy like Lou Reed in the Velvet Underground, like what he did with the Velvets was totally against the grain. You know, you shouldn't sing songs about like waiting for the man or like heroin or all these things that he did. You're not supposed to do that because
Right.
that's not going to work, right? And then eventually that ended up creating a whole genre like 30 years later, where people said that, you know, alternative music and grunge music went there. You know, Kurt Cobain went there. Eddie Vedder went there, and it became popular. Like 30 years later, taking those type of ideas. So something like this, the innovators during their time are always told to like, well, you shouldn't do that. Hendrix was told to turn the feedback down. You know, engineers wanted to EQ it out of Electric Ladyland, and he had to go on the board and tell them, don't change that. And they kept on telling him, you can't do a record like that. You can't have that level of distortion. You can't have that level of feedback. And a lot of times, if you check, you know, jazz musicians, innovators, like all the great innovators, always had people telling them that you're not supposed to do that.
I've been told that a lot.
So so music, I mean, there are some things that you're learning. Okay, yeah, there are some rules in music. You know, there's some rules in engineering. There are rules in science, but you know, Einstein broke the rule. You know, and they gave him D's and E's. They told him he didn't know what he was doing. So it's like a lot of times, like you take it with a grain of salt. You kind of learn your craft, and then it's okay. I'm actively aware of what the rule is, but I choose to break it because I want to do something different.
Yeah.
You know, and so I think it's cool to learn what the parameters are, and then make choices. And I think every artist kind of makes those choices.
Yeah. It's like a good way to describe. It is a choice to not follow the rules, I guess.
Yeah. Because it's like, I mean, some people act like you're not following rules
Yeah.
and you don't understand. And I think I think that then they think it's like a lack of your education or lack of understanding, and you have to kind of tell them that they make a personal choice as an artist, and then whether they believe that makes it more valid or not doesn't really matter. But I think that's like somebody's first impression is their first assumption, that you don't know, and I think that's when then they try to denigrate your work. Because they act like you don't know what you're doing. But it's interesting also, I guess you're learning all about the DAW because that's probably the world you live in. So what type of digital audio workstation is your
right now? I've been
method right now?
using Ableton Live more. When I first started learning, I started on Soundtrap because everybody said that was like the easiest, like any dummy could pick it up and learn. So I was like, that sounds about right. It was okay, but like you can't really do much on there. It's pretty limited. But it is a good place to start, I feel like. But Ableton's a lot you can do more. Like, there's so much on it. There's so much I don't know all of it yet.
Is like when so does Berkeley have like a preferred thing they teach people? Is there a preferred tool that they want to tell, or they basically
they're training us, at least in the classes I'm in Ableton Live Suite, Reason, and Logic, and also yeah, Logic we haven't gotten that far yet. We're about to do Reason, but yeah, I've heard Logic is hard, but I don't know.
Yeah, Logic is. I think it's hard because it's kind of like a recording engineer. And the thing is, like, a recording engineer is different than an artist. It's like a whole different thing. I mean, you can dive into be a recording engineer. You're not necessarily a musician, but you are an artist. And recording engineers learn like a different level of information when it comes to song production that kind of gets into the really grainy details. It's like becomes like sound science more and it's art and science, and you learn the science behind it, and then you learn the art behind it, and then you make choices again. But it's different than what a musician might learns their instrument or learns their voice and kind of works within that parameter. And then these people are working with all these tools to adjust the painting of sound. Even people call it like sound painting. but it's I think that tool ends up getting really deep into what you could do, kind of like the old
Yeah.
boards, like the analog boards that it still exists and kind of my preferred thing, but yeah, it's just a different skill set. But I think it's cool today. I get hear more and more artists want to learn recording engineering just because of COVID. They don't want to have
Yeah.
to pay or they can't get to the
Yeah.
engineer and they want to still put out the material. So I think it's cool that you're learning, within, all the DAW techniques. The more you learn, the less you're dependent on other people. So do you find that that's part of what you want to do is you want to maybe build your own studio or build your own environment in the future, like be more
Yeah.
hands-on control
It's,
over your art?
I would love to just be my own boss on it, I guess, and not have to like go anywhere, do anything special, just sit in my room and, you know, do everything.
Yeah. I think like building, yeah, today it's just interesting, like building a studio. There's the physical stuff you can build a studio with all your compressors and all the different like rigs you can do with your racks and like, all the vocal treatment and all the microphones and all this technical stuff that you can do. And then like, okay, well, I'm gonna get this really awesome mic. I'm gonna get all the preamps. I'm gonna get all these sound profile controls so I can get that, get a Neve board. Everybody talks about Neve analog boards, which kind of like Fleetwood Mac used on Rumors, and it kind of gives you a certain sound. Tom Petty used it on like Damn the Torpedoes. There's a certain sound that you get from like these analog boards that recorded all these classic albums, and it's hard to get that sound out of some of the digital stuff. And some people look for that, and people like use quarter-inch tape to get a certain sound. I just listened to a band out of New Orleans that recorded a whole record, mic'd
Oh,
it, did right to tape,
that's cool.
because they wanted a certain sound. And when you hear it, it does have a sound. It sounds more like 74
Love it.
than 2021. you know, and there's something about that. So have you gotten into any debates with people about like digital versus analog, or are there people around when you're going to school that talk
Not
about that kind
really.
of
I mean,
debate?
I've had a couple people like, I guess, come across my pages or whatever, and they're like, "Oh, so you're an artist?" And then I'm like, tell them what I do, and they're like, "Oh, well, you're not really an artist. You don't actually play instruments." Like I've had that, but
Oh, from the
yeah,
like hardcore
where
musicians
they're
that
like, "You're
play
not really a music
like
artist because
physical.
you just like do stuff on a computer and don't actually play like an instrument." And I'm like, "Okay, cool."
Well, I totally disagree with that because if you think about hip hop, like in rap, it kind of started from guys that weren't trained, right?
Yeah.
But even if you get to the blues, we weren't trained. African Americans, we couldn't get trained, so we kind of just had it, and we just did whatever we could do to get to it, right? And we created whole genres without going to school. But so the idea that they get these music purists that say, well, you can't be a musician if you're in
Yeah.
the box. It's like, well, what about hip hop? What about like Public Enemy? What about Grandmaster Flash and all these guys that did that stuff? The DJs back in the day on vinyl that came up with like what we have today in hip hop.
Yep.
That was kind of self-taught. They didn't know how to play bass guitar or electric guitar. They weren't like the Beatles or Pink Floyd, but they actually created music that everybody says undeniably today
Yep.
that that's music. So, so I think it's the same thing with like in the box with like Dog. I mean, the Bomb Squad, like on a Public Enemy album, I mean they did massive amounts of sampling using MPCs and all kinds of cool stuff, but it was kind of like the choices. So I think it's just like a recording engineer is an artist, a producer is an artist. That the choices you make when you sample, the choices you make when you make that drum beat,
Yeah.
you're making
I
artistic
agree.
choices. That they're the same kind of choices that a musician makes. It's the same thing. And I'm a keyboardist, so I can look. I know how to play keyboard, I know how to play piano, I know how to do that. But I respect a producer that can do music, and I listen to a lot of music that's not created on physical instruments. So it's music. It's all music. So it doesn't really matter if you're using a washboard or a Casio or a $10 guitar. What doesn't really matter if as long as it sounds good and makes you want to listen.
I agree. I just don't even get in debates with people like that. I'm just like, okay, cool. Like,
yeah, it's just interesting. It's just always purists that want to tell you what's what. It's like, because it's just. I mean, I have my preference. I mean, I have digital synthesizers and I have analog synthesizers. And when I say to people, they say, "Well, only use analog." Like, well, if you're gonna play piano, you're probably gonna use a digital synth because you don't physically have a piano, so you're gonna end up having to use like a digital synth that might use a sample to create that piano. And if you need that chord, I don't really care. I mean, it's kind of whatever serves the song. If I need a string sound, I'm not necessarily going to use a real cello. I need it, and I'm going to recreate it on a synth. And maybe that's not purist. It's like I'm not using a Boston Symphony to do it, but I need it, and I found a way to get to it. And whether you sample that to get to that, or whether you play that to get to that, it's not the real instrument, but you still made a choice of where you're going to place it or how you're going to use it. So have you done DJ performances like in live settings prior to COVID, or are you doing performances like online, or how do you handle?
I picked the worst year to DJ. We'll start with that. I actually learned how to DJ 2019. One of my friends taught me. He owns a company down here, and anyway, I basically was just doing like parties or events, not like performing DJ, but just more like an event DJ. And then I had just quit. I was doing makeup and also waiting tables. And then I quit doing the makeup to do DJing full time, and then COVID hit. So I didn't really do much before that happened.
You got hit right.
Yes.
You kind of got hit right when you're coming up. Yeah, that's kind of like the sad story of most of the bands I've interviewed in the last year, kind of like right in the middle of, I'm going to go to Europe and we're going to go do a tour in London, and boom, can't do it. We were going to go to Berlin, or we were going to go to LA, and we were going to go play the Whiskey a Go-Go, and boom, you can't play. So yeah, it's just been really frustrating. Have you just focused on your education and maybe just creating music, or you're trying to find ways to do I keep on seeing all these online events. There's actually an artist that I interviewed in New York that's actually doing these things where there's a stage, but there's nobody there, and then they live stream all these bands from that stage, and then they're setting up ticket systems, and they're trying to get fans to actually watch these live events with these bands actually physically playing on the stage.
I've watched a lot of those, but I have not been in any. But I would. I just don't know how to.
If you could
I'd probably do it.
Get into that, you would try to get into it. It seems like until we get things under control, it seems like the only way. A lot of bands are able to kind of do. I actually saw the Gorillaz. Is Damon Albarn and the Gorillaz is a big band. They're not as big as they used to be, but they actually did. I think my daughter's a heavy fan of them, and they actually had for around Christmas time, they had this concert that they did in London, that they did in this big warehouse, and they sold tickets and they did a whole performance, and it was pretty cool because they actually ran through a bunch of stuff, and they had all these sets that they made. And I guess they made sure they were in quarantine. They had the full band playing. And another band from Colorado called Tennis, they actually do music production for other bands and stuff. And they did the same thing. They did 2 live streams that had their fans pay for. And they were really cool. I mean, there was a full performance. And it felt, and my daughter's a big fan of these 2 bands, and she paid for the tickets. And I was like, well, that's cool. He said, yeah, you got to support the band.
Yeah.
Said, yeah, that's what you should do.
Yes.
Do you find in today's industry, one of the questions I always ask is
Yes.
that people seem to think music's free. And so fans don't seem to be willing to support. And I've kind of taught my daughter that, like, if you like a band, you should probably buy their merch, buy their vinyl, buy the T-shirt, because music's not free. It takes something. She sees I'm a musician. It takes work to do it, and she feels
Yes.
that she should pay for it. But it seems like that's not something that a lot of fans seem to understand.
I mean, I'm new, so I can't really say much on that. But I have noticed people definitely want to find the free way to listen to things, and you do not get paid much for streaming. I have learned that already. Like, you really don't get anything.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like back in the day, like well, even when I was touring, I make more money if I do a show in New York City in a 300-seat club. I'll make more money than I make all year from like 40,000 streams. I mean, I do 40,000 streams. I get like,
Yeah.
under a couple $100, or even like $150 or something, depending on the rate. And if I go to New York and do a show and sell T-shirts, I can make like $4,000 or $5,000 in a small show. And that's kind of why artists do live shows, because you can make way more money. It's kind of been like that even back to the Motown days, that bands didn't really get paid a lot from the labels. They got like 10 cents, 5 cents for a play, from the record sales. And then they physically made money from touring. They would actually make more cash touring, and it seems to be the same thing even going into today.
Yeah.
From the 50s to today, it's the same situation. So we have to find other ways. And one thing, as an electronic musician, I'm always telling new musicians, is like sync licensing, like owning your master, getting your stuff into film, TV, advertising. That's how you can make sure that you actually earn money as a musician. If you can get like even 30 seconds of a song licensed for a TV show or a commercial or advertising or use on the net, and you get a good contract, you make
streaming's
way more
like it's like nothing.
Well, it's a way to get, so a podcaster can find you, your audience finds you, and then they go to your show. It's kind of like the radio. I mean, it's the entry point to get you out there.
Yes.
And to get people aware of who you are. And then from there, you get them to your website, sell them a T-shirt, sell them a poster, sell them vinyl, get them to go to your show, get them to pay for you on Patreon, that's where you get the customer engaged, because they become aware of who you are. And then from there, you got to market. So are they teaching you as part of your course?
I don't know.
Music marketing? Are you learning?
I'm assuming. I know that
courses.
One of the classes I'm going to take in the last semester is going to be music business. So I'd assume they'd teach me marketing in there. But
yeah, that's good. I think all musicians need to go and take that kind of course online or learn it somewhere, because the history of music is that record labels, no matter how well intentioned,
that is exactly why I made sure I picked music business when I was picking up like the classes that I wanted to register for, because I've heard so many horror stories about people getting taken advantage of, and I just I don't want that to be me. I mean, I know it's going to inevitably be like something's going to happen, but hopefully I'll know.
Yeah. Well, just to get the business is just fraught with, even the big labels. The deals are not really advantageous to the artist. And sometimes you're kind of like, okay, well, then to get a bigger reach, to be able to get on into a tour, to be able to get to a venue, sometimes you got to have this agent, or you got to have your marketing team, and it's part of some label. And, it's kind of like, okay, well, you got to take a poison pill to a certain degree. But you've got to be smart about what you give them. You're making sure that you own your publishing, that if you give, that you have a significant amount of the publishing, if you have to give some of it up, That you don't get like a
Yeah.
70-30 where they have 70 and you've got 30. You know, or they got 80 and you got 20. It's like, no,
Yes.
you got to have like 80 and they got 20. You
No.
know,
That
and that's
the
not what they
record
want
label
to
that
do.
offered me um for the song that everybody said take off my EP offered like an like for I guess the song, not the publishing, but like an 80-20 deal, and I was like, ugh.
Yeah, that's what typical of their kind. Like, what's closer to like being, even something that's better. Like I've got like 70-30 on a couple of deals, distribution marketing deals, and I've got like 60-40 on some. But when they flip it the other way, that's kind of suspect. Is because because they tried to do it, because they said, well, we'll get you here, we'll get you there, we'll get you there. I was like, okay, really? Because part of the problem is like how they pay. A lot of times they pay like
Yeah.
semi-annually or quarterly, and then the other part is that what's the accounting for the place. And it's been notorious that even big bands have had to sue
Yeah,
to
that's
find
not
out
cool.
what is the accurate number of plays. And the fact that they can't be honest about the play count is it kind of gets to the whole heart of the problem. Like, so if it's like you got big bands like Pearl Jam and Wilco, big known bands that have gone independent because of that, because of the play count problem, and getting their own actuaries to count the plays and to count the sales, just because the industry has been like fraught with funny business with that stuff, which
Yes.
is not cool. It's like, because we're trying to, we're artists,
Yeah.
and we're not tend to not want to be business people. It's not kind of our first goal is not to be an actuary, um, or an accountant, and they kind of prey on that. You'd rather be interested in like, get me on the stage, get me to London, get me on this show, uh, and then I'll worry about everything else after. But you kind of have to be smarter now,
Yeah.
even though
I feel like
you
I'm
maybe
definitely
don't want to focus
fortunate.
on it.
Well, I have Chance who like always gives me good advice, and then I made friends with somebody who's actually like a manager. He's actually talking to the label right now to see if like he can help me get a better deal from them, I think. But I know I lucked out with that. But if I
That's
ever
cool. It's good to get advocates. It's good to have like, but people don't
Nope.
realize like you get a label, but that doesn't mean you got a tour manager. It doesn't mean you have artist representation. It's like there's so many different hats in the business that you find out. It's like, oh, I actually need a booker. If I want to show, the record label might not actually get me in there. I actually need a booker. Um, and that ends up being like something a lot of people get confused. It's like, well, how can the label doesn't book me anywhere? Because they don't really do that. I mean, they used to do that,
Yeah.
but now you kind of got to get your
Yeah,
own
it's a lot
booker.
different than people think it's going to be,
you know,
for sure.
but yeah, yeah. I mean, getting the booking
Yeah.
agency is core to your income stream, and it's kind of like if you can get a decent booking industry that actually can get you, or if they pay that your hotel gets paid for, it's in your contract. Your travel gets paid for, it's in contract. That they got to pay you a certain amount. That they count the people in the crowd, you get a certain percentage of the ticket. They're the ones that do that. That make sure that happens. And like the better agency you get that has access to the venues, that's what you want. When venues start opening again, that's. I was in the situation. I finally got a booker. He's going to send me to like Berlin and London. And then COVID happened. So it's like, oh great, I finally got a booker that I'm all signed up, and then COVID hit. It's like, so now I'm not going anywhere. But yeah, it's kind of core in what we do is like the understanding of the different roles and how you actually get on a stage, how you get into your music into video games. How do you do that? You gotta get the people that can get you that place. But so what are your plans for the next
Hopefully
year?
to get through school, and I mean, I'll be in school for a few more years, I guess, but get through this year of school and then keep my sanity and make as many songs as I can that are actually decent. And I don't know. I know at one point Chance was saying he wanted to like go on tour, but obviously I don't think it's going to happen with COVID, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think maybe fourth quarter things might get to a point where you could actually have some kind of venues open. But it's kind of like based on how many people get vaccinated. But yeah, I think it's getting to a point. Man, I've
I
seen
do
this whole
like
thing with the
those.
drive-in type of concerts. I think that by the time you get to the summer, there's going to be a lot of
Yeah.
venue people, guys who run venues. They're like, well, how are we going to make money? And the only way to really do it is the drive-in kind of concept. If you want to make money this year, people who invest in that drive-in type of festival that allows people to be in their cars and actually see bands on stages, I think that's potentially where a lot of artists are going to be able to do something. So hopefully that gets more attention. I've seen in like LA and San Francisco, there's been stuff like that happening. And I've actually seen some of them, but on TV or on the net.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen as many lately because I think it's pretty bad. Right now, people haven't been able to focus on that.
I've been to two of them. They're actually really cool.
We can do that.
But
yeah, so it sounds like to me that more guys who run venues need to like take advantage of that and try to create something. But somebody's got to invest in it. But,
yeah.
Hopefully that will happen because I think that's kind of like the core. I think more people would be into that than the online. Because they want to be interacting with the band.
It really feels like the two I went to. It felt like a real show. Like you had to stay away from people. I almost kind of liked it. Like that you had to stay away from people because I don't like being like in the middle of a huge like sweaty crowd.
Yeah,
people throwing you around. So
yeah. That was one thing about going to see Nirvana or Pearl Jam.
Yes.
Is like, the likelihood of getting a boot in your face was kind of like,
yeah,
okay, I like this band, but
I don't want like to
face.
have to get a nose job after or anything.
Yeah. So it's like, yeah, I'm into that. I was at Woodstock when Green Day had the mud event. I was actually there. And it was like, it wasn't just Green Day getting mud thrown on them. Anybody that was like in the range, we were all getting hit. And it was like, okay, wait, like this seems cool until you get mud and rocks thrown at you. I guess
that's usually how things go.
People than what it actually felt like being there. Yeah, but it's cool to have you on the show, and as you put out new material, when your EP is ready to come out, we have a tendency to have artists come on again and help promote their work. And so when you're ready to drop another project and you want to push it, we have had programs where we go through and kind of do a record release or project release program.
That's awesome.
And we push a person's new work. So if you've got like a target date and you want to kind of align it to get some press, you can use
thank you for
our channel to do that if you want.
And thanks for having me on here. It's been fun.
We're going to push this out. We are on 11 platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Radio Public, Overcast, many, many more. As soon as we publish, it gets migrated automatically to all those platforms. We will send you a link to the Apple and Spotify and Anchor FM version of the show. And that will be within the next hour. And we will promote it on our Instagram and our channel, so it allows us to actually directly promote the Spotify version, because Anchor FM is actually part of Spotify, and so we will push the Spotify version, which actually will be clickable through the highlight. So that'll be the version that people, as soon as they hit the button, they'll be able to go right to the Spotify version of the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So thank you for being on the show, and we hope everybody. Oh, it's no problem. We love talking to all the artists out there. It's, as a musician, it's cool to talk to other musicians. So
thank you.
that's something we like to do. Well, thank you. And we'll talk to you later. And we're very psyched that you're at Berkeley, because that's something we always wanted to do. That's a cool thing. So we talk to you again. We'll probably find out how you're doing.
I'll probably have a lot to talk about.
The depth of what you've learned.
Bye.